And of course, these differences are not a natural thing. They arise as a result of policies or the absence of policies that create these enormous spatial inequalities in resources and in the environments that people live.
"60 years ago, Richmond was a boomtown.
Here was assembled one of the nation's largest industrial armies.
During World War II, the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond ran 24 hours a day. The war effort drew workers of all ethnicities to Richmond. When the war ended, new governmental policies brought sweeping changes to communities like Richmond. As the shipyards closed, thousands of jobs left. So did anyone who could. But only white families could get the new government-backed mortgages to buy homes in the new suburbs. Richmond's population fell by a third.
We had vast public investments in building the suburbs of America. Federally supported loans, FHA loans, went to people who were moving to the suburbs, and for many years, up until the 60s, those loans were available on a racially restricted basis. African Americans and other people of color didn't have access to them.
Until 1962, out of $120 billion in government-backed home loans, less than 2% went to non-white households. In Northern California, between the war and 1960, of 350,000 federally guaranteed new home loans, less than 100 went to black families. In cities like Richmond, African Americans were left behind in increasingly neglected neighborhoods. In the 1980s, poor Latino and Southeast Asian immigrants began joining them in these same neighborhoods.
Once the community starts to go downhill, nobody wants to actually invest in the community, so the banks don't want to come in and the shops don't want to come in. Then you don't have a commercial base, you don't have the community taxes that can then feed back into the schools. Now you don't have good schools, so families don't want to move into the community if they don't have to because you don't have good schools, and you get a sort of vicious cycle of everybody who can will leave the community.
This isn't something that happens overnight, and it isn't the fault of the people who live there. The people who live in low-income, disinvested communities did not do this to themselves.
20 years before his heart attack, Kwai tried to move his family out of Richmond, but 11 months later, they had to move back.
I can't find my job up there, and she can't find her job up there. And move back, my older son, hang around with the wrong group and then use some kind of drug. I just don't know what to do. I try to help him. I try to straighten him out. Spend a lot of money, owe people a lot of money. That's what in my mind all the time. So it's worry, just worry. When I'm going to pay up all of this, and how I'm going to do it.
If you think about when you're worried, you're always a little bit more activated. There's a little bit more vigilance. You're sort of checking things out a little bit more carefully. And if you can imagine that happening day after day, all day, every day, it's exhausting. And it wears on the body system.
When stress is chronic, when we're endlessly worried about our bills, our job, our children's safety, the body pumps out cortisol and adrenaline. But too much of these stress hormones over time can increase arterial plaque, raise blood pressure, and weaken our immune system, increasing our risk for almost every chronic disease, including heart disease, the leading killer in America.
We've done studies that have shown that living in disadvantaged neighborhoods is related to an increased risk. It's about 50 to 80% increase in risk of developing heart disease. And this has been replicated in other studies.
In our society today, everybody experiences stress. However, in many disadvantaged communities, what we have is the accumulation of multiple negative stressors, and it's so many of them, it's as if someone is being hit from every single side. And it's not only that they're dealing with a lot of stress, they have few resources to cope.
You know, our strategy is work together. Where we live is like you as leader.
The health challenges of low-income Laotians, Vietnamese, and Cambodians are often masked when they're lumped together as Asian Americans.
We're talking about justice, right?
Guai's cousin, Torm Normpersert, organizes his community to address local health and environmental problems, joining forces with other activists in Richmond.
Richmond is a very diverse community, and there is a very rich and historical network of community agencies and community organizations. That's been enhanced by the new waves of immigrants who've brought and developed their own community agencies to address health problems.
One of the greatest health challenges to the community and its children is exposure to violence. In 2005, Richmond had one of the highest murder rates in the United States.
Somebody just came and knocked at the door. She came out, she said, "Who's that, Dad?" I said, "I don't know. Just don't open the door." And then I heard it sound like the knock again. And I ran back. It wasn't a knock. They already shoot her.
Dốc nó cười tao mưa nè. Tao pin là cái pung là nghiêm là ống cúp. Dốc nó về lọt này cười chăn tao mưa gọi về.
Guai and Knorn's daughter Chan was a successful student who became the mistaken target of a Southeast Asian drug gang.
The specter of community violence has completely transformed the way that people live in certain neighborhoods. So it's a public health issue not only for the prevention of premature death through homicide, but for the ripple effects it has on the other things that contribute to people's poor health. The ability of people to go out, to go shopping, to live a normal life.
In fact, research now suggests that some adult health problems may be traced to living with violence as a child.
The impact of that stress, the impact of that exposure to violence, triggers physiological responses in the child and can actually be disruptive to the developing brain and the developing immune system, such that you are primed then to be more vulnerable to physical and mental health problems all through your life.
When I'm outside, I hear gunshots in there by the school. And I also hear some gunshot too, right there.
We worked with the kids in Richmond, and many of those kids didn't think they would live beyond the age of 20. So we proposed to do a study on hope, trying to show kids that they can work their life around so that they do have a future.
And pick a photo to write about.
The program that resulted, Youth Empowerment Strategies, or YES, helps youth develop a sense of hope by showing them at an early age how, by their actions, they can work together to create positive change in their community.
We're the YES program B5, and we came up with the project.
Hope impacts health because then you don't internalize a lot of the behaviors about feeling hopeless and feeling alienated from society. What it is that you do is you feel proactive and you realize that you have a say in how things can be. And so you engage in making things be that way.
That's why we think it's
Control over our environment gives us reason to be hopeful, and hope is an often overlooked factor for good health. But how might a neighborhood's residents gain that control? 800 miles north in Seattle, Washington, at High Point, public health and housing agencies and developers took a radical approach to give one neighborhood some of the health advantages found in wealthier communities. 60 years ago, High Point was a lot like Richmond. It began in the 40s as housing for temporary defense workers. By the 1990s, High Point housing had deteriorated.
These were built for temporary housing. We told the neighborhood they'll only be here a few years, and they're still here 60 years later.
I lived in the apartment here on the inn on Graham here. It's right there behind that little tree. I felt anxious, you know, because bullets were flying. And, you know, you did not know when that was going to happen or what the consequences would be.
If it was unsafe